Well, that's what our investigation is going to reveal. I can tell you that I have looked at the underlying source documents, which include more revelations regarding Bruce Orr and his wife, Nellie, and the connection with GPS. There was a direct pipeline into the DOJ, essentially from the Democratic National Committee and Fusion GPS. Right. That is troubling. More bad details are going to come out about that, unfortunately. Who at the FBI was aware of that? We're still determining that.
That was 4 years ago. Welcome back. That was then Texas Congressman and former Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe on this program back in February of 2018. Much of what he told us 4 years ago, and he classified important documents, all of it was proven again last week in a D.C. courtroom. Clinton campaign lawyer Michael Sussmann was acquitted by a D.C. jury for lying to the FBI. But what we learned in that trial was arguably more important than what Sussmann did or did not do. Joining me right now to discuss what came out of the Sussmann acquittal and the John Durham investigation is, once again, former Director of National Intelligence, prosecutor, and Texas Congressman John Ratcliffe. John, thanks very much for coming back. We appreciate you. Everything you said over the last several years has materialized just exactly as you said it. Thanks for educating our viewers so many years ago. What is your reaction to what happened last week with Michael Sussmann?
Well, of course, the verdict was disappointing because it was contrary to the evidence. I mean, Michael Sussmann's own text messages confirmed exactly what the government said, which is that he claimed to just be a private citizen coming in when he had a story about a connection between a Trump campaign server and a Russian bank, which was clearly false. When the evidence clearly showed that he was acting on behalf of the Clinton campaign, unfortunately, the judge in this case wouldn't allow certain evidence of the Clinton conspiracy to be included, but more importantly, allowed Clinton donors to serve on the jury, as well as other Democratic donors, and even one juror whose daughter was on the same sports team with the defendant. So, you know, unfortunately, it wasn't a just verdict. We have a great jury system in this country, but it doesn't always get it right. This jury found Michael Sussmann not guilty. As you recall, another jury found O.J. Simpson not guilty. And I think most Americans that would have paid attention to both trials would have said that they got that wrong. But to the point that you just made, Maria, you're right. To the bigger picture here, John Durham's prosecution may have lost this battle, but they're clearly winning the war. The most powerful testimony to come out of this was admissions by the Clinton campaign about the fact that the Trump-Russia collusion narrative was, in fact, approved by Hillary Clinton. You remember when I declassified that intelligence, the Clinton campaign said it was utter BS, and the media said it was Russian disinformation. Last week, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, under oath, had to admit, no, Hillary Clinton approved this plan to smear Donald Trump and his campaign with fake allegations of Russian collusion. And her lawyer, Mark Elias, under oath admitted, yeah, we paid Fusion GPS millions of dollars to create the now debunked Steele dossier, which served as the basis of the investigations into the Trump campaign for more than 4 years. So that's what John Durham's going to be focusing on going forward. And it's why I'm optimistic that not only will he be successful in some of the ongoing prosecutions, but can expand the indictments that he wants to bring, given the involvement of certain FBI officials in spreading a false narrative to the American people.
Well, I mean, John, it's very discouraging to see what has taken place in our country with so many agencies politicized and really what appears to be a double standard and two different systems of justice. I mean, look what happened over the weekend to Peter Navarro. A former Trump official goes to the airport to catch a plane. As he's actually boarding the plane, FBI agents come over, put handcuffs on him and leg irons on his ankles. He said that they would not allow him to make a phone call. And then 3 minutes before he was to face a judge, they gave him a public defender. He said, I spoke to him yesterday. He told me they mishandled him. I mean, what? And yet, all of these years over the Clinton campaign lies about Donald Trump, and still we're waiting for accountability. And yet he is a supporter of Trump, and they go and they take him and they throw him in jail.
Well, I think people see, unfortunately, that there is that double standard. I mean, the foreman in the Sussmann jury came out and said, well, we didn't think he should be charged. You know, there are bigger things going on in this country than lying to the FBI. Well, you know, tell that to Michael Flynn and to George Papadopoulos and folks associated with the Trump campaign. that were prosecuted, and the country was led to believe that, you know, these were crimes of the century. So there is a double standard there, and unfortunately, you know, the leadership at the FBI has played a prominent role in the American people losing faith and trust in that organization. You know, as I said, what the intelligence that I declassified clearly showed was that not just our intelligence community, but our law enforcement community was briefed on the fact that it was Hillary Clinton that created this entire Trump-Russia collusion narrative, and that the FBI knew that from the beginning of the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, and that they also knew it from the beginning of the Mueller investigation, and yet, you know, produced a 387-page report, you know, on that doesn't mention the fact that it was Hillary Clinton's campaign that created those allegations. So, you know, when that is the purpose of what your special counsel is to be, and you leave that out altogether, it shows that there was a deliberate effort here, unfortunately, on behalf of some folks in our law enforcement community to mislead the American people for political reasons.
Yeah, we just showed the John Brennan notes on the screen, which you declassified. That was one key document that you declassified, which showed John Brennan wrote notes saying the Russians know that Hillary Clinton is coming out with a story against Trump. And the second item that you declassified, tell me about that.
Yeah, so the second, so by law, because there was a counterintelligence information involving a domestic actor, in this case the Clinton campaign, saying, look, Hillary Clinton's campaign is creating these false allegations against the Trump campaign, the CIA was required to send that information over to the FBI, which they did. But it went to FBI agent Peter Strzok, and I think as your viewers will know that that is the same agent who for months had been sending hundreds of text messages saying that he was going to personally stop Donald Trump from ever becoming president of the United States. And he's the same agent who Robert Mueller added to the Mueller investigative team as one of the lead investigators. So from the very beginning, it shows that the FBI and everyone in law enforcement that then became part of the Mueller investigation were aware from day one, Maria, that this whole Trump-Russia investigation that was playing out over years to the American people was created by the Hillary Clinton campaign. And again, to make that point, 387-page report and not one single word about the fact that the origins of this came from the Clinton campaign. That was deliberate, it was willful, it was political, it was intentional. And I think the American people see that now, and that's what's important about John Durham continuing in the face of this, notwithstanding what individual juries will do, but to tell this story to the American people. You know, accountability, Maria, I think is going to have to come from the American people themselves in November, in 2022, and in 2024, in holding the, you know, officials accountable from the Democratic Party that were involved and from the FBI that were involved, that were clearly acting, you know, on behalf to advance, you know, a Democratic, progressive, liberal agenda.
So is there anything that you think could happen that will get us more in balance and not have such a double standard? Do you want to say anything about what took place on Friday for Peter Navarro being handcuffed?
Well, I think it was outrageous. If Peter Navarro is telling the truth, and that really is what happened, Christopher Wray should hold a press conference and should, you know, hold publicly accountable the people that acted so out of line, to put in leg irons an official from the Trump campaign for defying a subpoena. It's outrageous.
Yes. John Ratcliffe, thank you so much.